The first knock on my door wasn't unusual. Neighbors complain all the time in communities like mine. But when I opened it, I wasn't met with a polite request. I was handed a letter stamped with authority, demanding I remove something from my own property. At first, I laughed it off. Then came the warnings, the threats, and finally, the police. What started as petty HOA gossip spiraled into a battle that shook the entire neighborhood. And the craziest part? The very rule they tried to use against me didn't even exist. So why were they so desperate to see me gone? Life in our neighborhood was supposed to be peaceful. I had worked hard for years to buy this home, a modest cabin-style house tucked at the edge of a tree-lined cul-de-sac. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine, and that meant everything. The mornings were quiet, the kind where you could hear birdsong before the world woke up. Families jogged by with strollers, kids rode bikes, and there was always a neighbor waving from across the street. On the surface, it looked like the kind of community people dream of. I spent weekends on small projects, repainting the porch, planting flowers, even adding a swing out front for my niece when she visited. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing offensive. Just the simple joys of maintaining a home. And for a while, everything felt perfectly normal. But communities like these have an invisible current running through them. A current made of rules, expectations, and the unspoken power certain people think they hold. It doesn't show itself at first. Instead, it hides behind polite smiles, friendly greetings, and the illusion of harmony, until one small thing, something you'd never expect, becomes the match that lights it all on fire. For me, it started with whispers, a neighbor's glance lingering too long at my yard, a comment about keeping things uniform dropped casually at a mailbox. At first, I brushed it off. After all, who cares if my flower bed wasn't the same shade of mulch as everyone else's? Who could possibly be offended by a porch swing for a child? But in neighborhoods controlled by HOAs, the smallest detail can become a weapon. And soon, I would discover that behind the smiles and block parties, there were people who weren't just watching. They were waiting for the chance to remind me this wasn't just my home. It was theirs to control. At first, I thought the letter on my doorstep was a mistake. The HOA claimed my porch swing was a safety hazard. A safety hazard? It was bolted into the ceiling beam, installed properly, and barely used except when my niece visited. I laughed, tucked the letter away, and went about my day. But a week later, another letter came. This time, the tone was harsher. It warned me that if I didn't remove the unauthorized structure, I'd be fined $50 per day. My stomach dropped. $50 every single day for a wooden swing. I walked outside, looked at it, and couldn't believe what I was reading. Neighbors began to notice. A few shook their heads sympathetically, whispering that the HOA picked targets sometimes. Others avoided me altogether, as if being seen near my property might draw unwanted attention to them too. It was subtle at first, an extra glance, a quiet murmur, but it was enough to remind me I was being watched. Then came the inspection. One morning, I looked out the window and saw a clipboard-wielding man pacing in front of my house. He wasn't a stranger. He was on the HOA board, one of the very people who signed the letters. He measured the distance of my hedges from the sidewalk. He crouched down, snapping photos of my gutters. And then he pointed his phone toward the porch swing. That's when I realized it wasn't just about the swing. They were looking for anything. Days later, the fines began rolling in. Not just for the swing, but for things I didn't even know were violations. A non-uniform mailbox because mine had a black flag instead of red. A cluttered yard because of garden tools leaning against the fence after a Saturday of work. Even noise disturbances, though I lived alone and never played music louder than a whisper. Each fine was like a punch to the gut. Individually, they seemed small, 25 here, 50 there. But together, they piled up fast. Within a month, the HOA claimed I owed nearly $700. I stared at the bill, hands shaking, wondering how this could possibly be legal. I tried reasoning with them. I wrote letters, sent emails, even attended one of their meetings. I walked into that room hoping for fairness, but the looks I got said everything. Smirks, eye rolls, whispers passed down the table. When I presented my case, calmly explaining that the swing wasn't dangerous, that the mailbox had been there since before I moved in, they barely listened. And then, one board member leaned forward and said something I'll never forget. Rules are rules, If you can't follow them, maybe this isn't the right community for you. That single sentence lit a fire in me. I wasn't just being fined, I was being pushed out. Slowly, strategically, they wanted me gone. But why? I found out the next week. A neighbor, someone I'd known casually for months, pulled me aside one morning. She spoke in a hushed voice, her eyes darting toward the street. "They want your property," she said. "That swing? That's just the excuse. They've been trying to buy up houses on this side of the block for years. Yours is the last one with land backing up to the creek." Suddenly, it all made sense. My yard wasn't just a yard. It was leverage, and the HOA wanted it. From that point on, everything intensified. Letters turned into visits. Board members stood outside my home, pointing at shrubs, jotting down notes. I caught one man taking photos through my fence. When I confronted him, he shrugged and said, "Just making sure you're in compliance." Then came the threats. Not direct, not obvious, but sharp enough to cut. "Wouldn't want things to get messy with your mortgage," one letter read. Another warned that if fines weren't paid, the HOA had the right to place a lien on my home. Imagine that, losing your house over a porch swing. Nights became restless. I lay awake, replaying every encounter, wondering how far they'd go. Each morning, I half expected to see a tow truck in the driveway, hauling away my car for some imagined violation. My home, the place I'd worked for, the place I'd built with care, no longer felt safe. It felt like a target. Still, I refused to back down. I took photos of everything, documented every letter, and started researching HOA laws. The more I learned, the angrier I became. Many of the so-called rules they cited weren't even in the official bylaws. They were fabrications, scare tactics meant to break me. But here's the thing about intimidation. It only works if you let it. And I wasn't about to roll over. So I pushed back. I sent certified letters demanding proof of each violation. I highlighted every discrepancy, every invented rule, and warned them I was prepared to take the matter to court. For a moment, there was silence. No letters, no fines, no visits. I thought maybe, just maybe, I had scared them off. But silence in a neighborhood like mine wasn't peace. It was the calm before the storm. Because the next time the HOA came after me, they didn't just send letters. They called the police. The knock on the door that night was louder, sharper than anything I'd heard before. 3 booming thuds rattled through the frame, followed by a voice that carried authority. "Police department, open up." My chest tightened. I had done nothing wrong, but in that moment, guilt and fear tangled in my stomach like barbed wire. Neighbors peeked from their windows, curtains swaying as faces pressed to the glass. The HOA couldn't have orchestrated it better. This wasn't about safety. This was about humiliation. When I opened the door, 2 officers stood tall, uniforms crisp, lights from their cruiser splashing red and blue across the quiet street. Behind them, smug, satisfied, stood 2 members of the HOA board, arms crossed like generals watching their orders unfold. "Sir," one officer began, "we've received a complaint about unauthorized structures on your property. We're going to need to inspect the premises." I froze. An unauthorized structure? They were calling the porch swing a crime scene. My voice trembled at first, but anger pushed it steady. "This is my property. That swing is safe, legal, and well within code." The officer's gaze shifted, hard and unreadable. For a second, I thought they might drag me out then and there, but instead, he asked for my ID, then radioed it in. The silence that followed was thick, the kind that makes every second feel like an hour. Then it happened. The radio crackled, and the officer's expression changed. His posture straightened, and suddenly, shockingly, he snapped into a salute. "Yes, Major General." The words seemed to echo down the street. A murmur rippled through the small crowd that had gathered, neighbors now stepping onto their lawns, whispering. The HOA board members stiffened, their smirks faltering as the officer turned back to me not with suspicion, but with respect. I wasn't just a homeowner. I was a retired Major General, a fact I had never flaunted, never needed to, until now. The officer lowered his salute only after I acknowledged it. His tone shifted completely. "Sir, with your permission, we'll conclude this inspection. It seems there's been a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. That was the polite way of saying the HOA had just weaponized the police to try to take me down and failed. But the night wasn't over. The board members sputtered. insisting I was out of compliance, demanding the officers enforce their rules. One of them even shoved a stack of papers forward, waving them like a sword. The officer glanced at the documents, then handed them back with,